I'd like to introduce, therefore, Mr. Amarpal Sidhu, who's made a special study of the First Sikh War. Now, I don't know how many of you had ancestors who served in the First Sikh War. I know somebody who's researching guns, I think, who came from the First Sikh War. Was that right? Oh, sorry, the Second Sikh War. Maybe that'll be another lecture. Who's going to talk to us about this. And I don't know how many ancestors, how many people have ancestors who served in this war, but it was certainly, thank you very much, I see you did that. So it's going to be a very interesting talk. I see you've written a book about this, and so I hope that we can sell one or two copies for you. But thank you so much. Mr. Sidhu.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for that. And, I was in a little bit of danger of not sort of copying up today. I was sort of travelling up from Wembley, and it was like it was chock-a-block, you know, all the way down. So you know, I thought I'd sort of pop up here at about 1 o'clock, and eventually made it about 2 o'clock. So you know, it just shows you how much traffic there was on the way. But just made it in time anyway. So I've actually bought a PowerPoint presentation, and so I'll just let sort of be a little bit more interesting to have a few slides, you know, as we talk. So, well, I first got into, you know, Anglo Sikh War about 9-10 years ago, and never actually studied it before that, and it just sort of caught my imagination, you know, as soon as I started reading up about it, and you know, eventually decided to sort of get into it, you know, much more sort of heavy detail, and I've only got the hour, so what I thought I'd do is, rather than going through sort of blow-by-blow accounts, if you like, rather than going through, you know, a blow-by-blow account of the battles, which might be a little bit boring, I thought I'd go through, obviously the battles themselves, but just go through the background to why it happened, essentially. And then go through some of the images as well of the battlefields. You know, if there's any sort of battlefield fans here, you know, it's always nice to see some of the images of you know, where these things happened, really. And also what's left there, really. Unfortunately, you know, things are changing really fast in India, in Punjab. You know, population growth and, you know, villages sort of spilling out, and so. You know, just like here, I suppose, you know, a lot of things are sort of disappearing, and but there's still, you know, things left. So, you know, if anyone visits these places at some point, you know, they can always sort of have a look, and you know, there's some stuff still there. So, including a few graves and monuments as well. So, and. Well, one of the first books I read was actually written by Donald Featherstone, so I'm sure, you know, some chaps and everybody here has sort of maybe read one of his books, and he sort of summed up the war as bravery, stupidity and treachery, and you know, that sort of just about sums it up, really. I thought that was a brilliant line from one of his books. There was a lot of bravery, and a really impressive amount of discipline as well, especially in one of the battles at, you know, Ferozshah, which really impressed me. It's a bit of stupidity as well, and very sort of overconfidence, if you like, you know, on both sides as well. And there's also treachery as well, and that was specifically on the Sikh side, which we'll sort of go into as well. But it was actually, you know, it was actually a war that nobody wanted, really. You know, there wasn't really any sort of animosity between the Sikhs and the British, really. I suppose just like any war, you know, there's no real animosity there. It's all politics and what have you, really. You know, circumstances, and, you know, you get a war. But I don't think anybody really wanted the war. You know, the British didn't want it, and I don't think most Sikhs really wanted it as well. So, you know, it's just one of these circumstantial things, really. But I I mean, I suppose the climax of that campaign was Ferozshah, and one of the things that really sort of makes this war really stand out was, you know, what a close-run thing that battle actually was. So we'll sort of go into that as well. But now, if it sort of turned into a loss for the British, then you know, it really was a sort of a loss of India type situation. You know, you had the Governor General there, you know, Commander-in-Chief. A lot of the European regiments were there as well. So if that had been a defeat, then you know, sort of British India was in big trouble. So we'll go through that as well. So what I thought I'd do is just go through the background as to, you know, as to why it began. And the sort of British contact with Punjab actually started sort of probably about 50 years before that. You know, there were sort of various Europeans and sort of going to and fro. And but it really only sort of took off around about sort of 1809. You know, that's about that time that the British had sort of control of Delhi and a little bit further. But I don't think they had any sort of aspirations to go much further at that point. But there was a chap called Ranjit Singh who was quite a sort of extraordinary chap. He was quite short. He was quite a sort of a village sort of chap, if you like. His father owned a few villages. You know, he was a sort of local sort of petty chieftain, if you like. From those sort of humble beginnings, you know, he actually lost an eye as well. So he was quite short. He's totally illiterate. He couldn't write his own name. But he was a bit of a military genius, and from these sort of humble beginnings, he sort of basically, you know, conquered the whole of Punjab, really, you know, over the next sort of 10, 15 years, you know. So quite sort of extraordinary, really. But you know, he wasn't the only Sikh ruler, and there was actually a number of other Sikh states south of the Sutlej River. We got a little bit worried, you know, this guy's expanding so fast, you know, we want to, you know, what are we going to do about it? And they actually approached the British, you know, for protection, and which, you know, the British were happy to do. And so that's it. So the British border went right up to the Sutlej River. So although it wasn't sort of technically British territory, because these kingdoms were sort of independent, if you like, you know, they effectively it was a border, and it gradually became the border of the British and the Sikhs. So that's the chap, Ranjit Singh. He was actually quite sort of friendly with the British. Actually, he realised that you know, he wasn't really powerful enough to sort of take the East India Company on, and so you know, he decided to you know, make a treaty basically. He had a very sort of irregular sort of force at that time. Very sort of feudal, if you like, you know. Certainly nothing that he could take the British on with, so absolutely no chance of taking them on. So, you know, he made the treaty, and that gave him opportunity to actually develop the Sikh army, which he did, you know, over the next 30, 40 years. And he totally modernised it, effectively. Brought in a lot of European soldiers and officers from France, and there was even some Americans there, in fact, and a few British chaps as well, a little bit from everywhere really, and he actually used some British designs of artillery as well, and sort of used those as templates for his own artillery, along with other stuff. So, you know, by the end of the sort of late 20s, sort of early 30s, he had, you know, effectively the you know, the best Asian army in Asia. So, And the British actually, they were quite interested in making a treaty with him. You know, sort of 1805, 1810, you know, they weren't that sort of interested in sort of expanding north, you know, and the British were still sort of consolidating what they had in India at that stage. So, you know, although they sort of reached up to the Sutlej, there wasn't any real sort of interest in sort of expanding further north. And there was a few other reasons as well. You know, at that time Napoleon was thinking of, you know, invading India, and the British wanted allies essentially, and Ranjit Singh was a very strong ally. You know, it was actually a very firm friendship at that time. And also they weren't really sort of interested in controlling all the sort of tribesmen in the sort of I suppose what's Pakistan now. You know, it's a bit of a money pit really. Even now, really, very difficult to control sort of territory. So they actually used Ranjit as almost like a policeman to sort of control that area. And that leaves the British to control the rest of India. You know, quite without much trouble. So, but that would change, you know, later on in sort of 1840s. You know, the British had sort of consolidated themselves by that time, and so had Ranjit Singh as well. So these sort of reasons gradually sort of disappeared, I think, over time. And by that time, Ranjit Singh actually died in 1839. You know, he died at the age of 59. Very, he liked his drink basically, and he used to drink some really sort of fiery stuff that nobody else could sort of cope with, and even he couldn't cope with really. So you know, did everything to excess, you know, put it that way. He died very early, in fact, and that's one of the sort of big sort of if questions in sort of Sikh culture and, you know, Punjab. You know, if he just survived another 20 years or 30 years, you know, what would have happened? You know, but he died. But he left a really strong army, very disciplined, very strong, and that could sort of match the British basically in artillery as well. So what he didn't leave was anyone who can control the army. So you know, he had that sort of strength of character, and in fact he did leave. He had a grandson who was called Nihal Singh, who actually inherited all his sort of genius, if you like, and but he died early. And some say there was a plot to kill him as well. So nobody quite knows, you know, what happened. But that left, you know, another 5, 6 sons who were pretty, you know, who were sort of playboys, if you like. You know, they weren't too interested in sort of solidifying the state, if you like. You know, and anyway, that's a map of what Ranjit Singh conquered. Actually, that's right at the top there. Compared to the rest of India, which was basically, you know, either in British control or you know, sort of half in control, if you like, sort of semi-independent states. So that was the situation. So if you can see the box there, that's where the battles would take place. And you've got a very strange situation in the Punjab. You know, after Ranjit Singh died. His sons sort of killed each other, and or they got killed by, you know, somebody or other, and he had some very sort of weak characters sort of coming to the front, really. And whenever there's a sort of weakness in government, you know, you always get the army coming in. So the army sort of filled a vacuum, if you like, of power. So by about 5, 6 years after, you know, Ranjit Singh died, you know, the army was actually controlling the state. And not just controlling it, you know, they were very aggressive, and anyone they didn't like, you know, used to, you know, off with his head type of thing, you know. So you know, you usually met a sort of sudden ending, if you like, you know. But you had a couple of chaps called Lal Singh and Tej Singh. take over. And these guys weren't actually Sikhs, believe it or not. They were Hindus who'd sort of become Sikhs, and they weren't Punjabis as well. So a very strange sort of situation, you know. You know, I suppose that's sort of politics, if you like. They managed to sort of get their way into the top, and in fact, there was a lot of Muslims and Sikhs in the Lahore government as well. So it wasn't purely Sikh. And what they decided to do was try and get rid of the army. You know, since they were so overbearing. You know, you can't run a government, you know, with the somebody pointing a bayonet, you know, on your back. So they decided to sort of throw it against the British, if you like, and hopefully, you know, the army would get destroyed, and that leaves them free. You know, obviously, you know, the British should then take over the Punjab, and but they'd still stay in power, and that was the plan, really, helping the British to sort of overcome the Sikh army. What they needed was an excuse, and unfortunately for, you know, the Punjab, and unfortunately for everyone, there was a chap called Broadfoot who was the political agent at that time, and he did some fairly sort of aggressive things at that time, which provided that excuse. You know, he sort of shot at one of the sort of Lahore judges, and he took over a few villages, and very sort of nominal things, but you know, enough to sort of raise an excuse, if you like. But nobody was really expecting war at that stage. You know, it's a very sort of strange situation. You know, so the British certainly weren't ready. They knew there was war coming, but they weren't really. They thought it'd be another, you know, a few months' time, and that gives them a chance to sort of get ready themselves. So it all came very suddenly, really. So Lal Singh actually pushed the Sikh army over the border, you know, which was the Sutlej River, and that's the kind of time scale we're looking at, really. Those were the 5 battles that, you know, took place. Sorry, am I getting in the way, or it's okay? So yeah, those were the sort of the battles that took place in the campaign. So over you're looking at about 6-7 weeks, during which, you know, the whole thing took place, and in the middle of winter as well, so, which isn't very comfortable in the Punjab. You know, it can get quite cold, so which we'll get into. Okay, well, I've gone through Lal Singh and Tej Singh. On the British side, you had Hugh Gough, who was the Commander-in-Chief, you know, a very experienced chap. And Henry Harding, who was the Governor General, who, you know, again, he was a military, you know, massive military experience in, you know, the Napoleonic Wars, and so you had 2 very sort of capable persons, you know, overconfident almost, really, I suppose. You know, when you have that much experience, sometimes you make some mistakes. So, okay, well, what the Lal Singh did was he brought the Sikh army to a small village called Ferozshah, which is about 10-12 miles from the border, you know, from the river. So the Sikh army crossed the river and got up to Ferozshah and made a sort of entrenched camp there. And the British came from the south, and they came up to a village called Mudki. Again, quite a small village, nothing to really sort of distinguish these places, really. They're all sort of small villages, and that's Mudki Village Lake. Now the British had been marching for about 10-15 miles. It was really hot. It was December, but it was unusually. Normally it gets very cold in the Punjab, but that year it was really hot, and really freezing at night as well, you know, so some really sort of hard marching, and most of the troops, when they reached Mudki, just jumped into the lake, you know, it was that hot. They just wanted to sort of cool off. This lake is now is quite small. It used to be about 4 or 5 times larger. So if you can imagine, you know, a huge sort of lake, you know, thousands of men just jumping in, not realising that, you know, Lal Singh's actually sent a detachment of Sikh troops down. And so about 10 minutes after they jumped in, they had to all jump out again and form lines, you know. Well, that's the map. Mudki, the battlefield actually is about a couple of miles up the road from Mudki. So, you know, as soon as the lines were formed, they were sort of moved up. And that road at the bottom actually goes to a village called Lahon, which isn't actually shown on this map. And it isn't shown on a lot of maps, in fact. It sort of splits, if you like. And that's where Gough sort of lined up his army. And that's the split in the road there. So if you can imagine, you know, a whole sort of host of British troops there sort of getting ready for battle. They couldn't actually see the Sikh line, which was only sort of half a mile or 3/4 of a mile along, really. And in fact, you can't see Lahon village from here. There were so many trees in the way. And you can see some of those sort of bushy trees now as well. There's still loads of them around there. It's basically a jungle, if you like. And not only that, there were that's taken from the middle of the battlefield, and that's looking towards Lahon. So that's the village where the Sikh line was drawn up. And not only were there a lot of trees, but there was a lot of hills in the way as well. So as you can see, I've just taken a picture of one of these sandy hills. And there were hundreds of these around, you know. They've all gone now, unfortunately. The farmers have sort of levelled them all off, and, you know, it's all sort of, you know, it's all plain sort of agricultural land now. But in those days, there were literally hundreds of these around. So you can't see, you know, more than, you know, beyond sort of 50 feet ahead, really. And on top of that, it was dark as well. You know, it was 4 o'clock at night, December, you know, the sun's setting, and there was a dust storm as well, caused by the troops. You know, the soil there is very loose. So, you know, if you've got sort of 20,000 men on each side, cavalry, you know, there's a huge amount of sort of dust sort of gathering up. So, worst case scenario, really, nobody could see a thing. In fact, a lot of British troops actually had to go to the doctors, you know, because they were sort of half blind, you know. So it was that bad, really. So in those sort of confusing sort of situations, you had the battle, you know, and I don't think anybody really knew what was happening, to be honest. That's a sort of picture of the battle. It doesn't actually show all the, you know, all the obstacles in the way and obstructions and things. I suppose it sort of gets in the way of the, you know, a nice image. But that's the British cavalry taking on the Sikh cavalry, and they actually made quite sort of short work of them, really. The British cavalry sort of chased all these irregular sort of cavalry away, and within the hour, and after about 5 p.m. to about 12, it was, you know, almost solidly an infantry contest. So, you know, in completely sort of dusty situation, you know, nobody knows what's going on. And it ended up at about 1 o'clock, actually, the battle. And unfortunately for the British, they lost Sir Robert Sale, who was, you know, sort of made his name in Afghanistan. And there's a few other casualties, but it was a much smaller contest, and you know, Gough declared it a win, basically. But it actually made both sides quite confident. You know, the Sikh soldiers, you know, that had fought there was actually a very small force, and I'm quite confident, you know, that when Gough reaches Ferozshah, you know, he's going to take on the whole Sikh army, and that's going to be a lot more difficult. So, you know, both sides were sort of very confident after that. This this is actually one of the earliest shots of the battlefield. So this is what it looked like, effectively. This was taken around about 1880. And it's not actually of the battlefield itself, but it's from close to the village. So you can't see the hills anywhere, but you can see all this sort of scrub land and dusty soil around. And right in the middle, you can actually see the British monument that was made later, relating to the war. So right on the horizon in the middle there, there's a sort of obelisk thing sticking up. Okay, well this is a model shot from the middle of the battlefield again. So again, you've got the monument there. I just thought I'd put the shot in because this road is still very sort of dusty and what it would have looked like, you know, sort of 150 years ago. They've actually tarmacked it now. But I like these sort of country roads. They, there's a lot more character to them, I think. They're all disappearing now, you know, they're all tarmacked and tarmacked them all over. Okay, well that was a monument that was made later on. That was about 1880. It's still there. The Punjab government's sort of doing something about these monuments now, but unfortunately the level of workmanship isn't quite the same as what it is here, you know. So you can see the very poor sort of workmanship being done on it, but it's something anyway. They're actually very, very well built. You know, I'm quite impressed with these things. You know, they do last. So yeah, it's still there. They're building some sort of cover around the sort of square, if you like. There's a sort of rectangular sort of thing with details on the battle itself. So they're sort of looking at a more sort of touristy thing that they could turn it into. That's another sort of close-up shot of the place, and that's another one. And I mean, I've been back a number of times, and it's always nice to be able to see if there's any sort of British graves there. And this is actually one of them. There's actually 3 graves still surviving in Woodkey. And what the British did was, after the battle, they brought all the dead bodies back to the village and buried them there. And the officers were buried separately, you know, in their own graves. And the common soldier, if you like, you know, they were sort of thrown into a pit, you know, sort of a communal grave, if you like. And I don't think that's ever been found. So, but that's an officer's grave. There used to be an obelisk on top of this thing, which the owner of the house has sort of raised, and so he sort of made it into a seating area. It'd be interesting to know whose grave it was, really. So shots of the owner there, you know, sort of posing with the place. There's a couple of other graves below all this firewood and, you know, sort of cow dung. Unfortunately covered, you know, you can't see it now, but you can actually see the brickwork below them. And unfortunately, he's sort of using that as a sort of place for firewood, if you like. And there was actually some obelisks there as well, which they sort of got rid of, unfortunately. That's another shot, sort of close up. Those are the only 3 graves that, you know, I've sort of managed to sort of find in Woodkey, really. I'm sure there's a few more. You know, the villages there are really expanding fast, you know, and so, you know, when somebody sort of makes a house, you know, the last thing they want to do is tell the government or the, you know, the authorities, because you know, it's just going to cause complications, you know, and so they, you know, presumably anything they find just gets thrown away, you know, it's not the best situation. Well, Woodkey was actually fought on the 18th, and 3 days later you had another battle at Ferozshah, and this was the main battle of the war, really. The the Sikh army was actually stationed at Ferozshah in a sort of U-shaped sort of entrenchment, and Gough, with the British force, came from the south, and you know, he had a very sort of strong liking for sort of a head-on sort of you know, no tactics sort of strategy. You know, let's just at them with the bayonet, you know, sort of thing. So what he decided to do was, you know, no, let's not use any tactics. You know, we'll attack sort of head-on. The British left wing would attack on the west there, and the British right wing would attack on the right, on the east there, and the centre would attack from the bottom. So almost like a sort of envelope, if you like. And he reached Ferozshah at about 4 o'clock. You know, same sort of time as, you know, Mudki was fought, and I think he had the impression that, you know, he'd win fairly quickly, you know, an hour or two, and then we'll be back to Mudki, you know, which is sort of 7-8 miles down the road, you know, sort of job done, and then go back to base. And so he didn't actually bring any baggage with him or anything like that. So you know, strictly a sort of quick mission and back. And it didn't quite turn out like that, really. Okay, that's another sort of map of the thing. And there was actually a lot of jungle around the Sikh camp, which the Sikh soldiers had actually cleared a few hundred metres, you know, just to sort of give themselves a really nice sort of a clear line to sort of fire across. So that's a sort of better map in some respects. Well, the attack actually started on the left with Sir John Littler on the left wing, and he was actually repulsed quite badly, and he lost quite a lot of men. He attacked twice, in fact. You know, the men sort of went back, regrouped, and then attacked again, and again repulsed. And so things started looking a bit sort of dodgy straight away, really, at that stage. So what Gough did was, now John Littler actually went back 2-3 miles to a village called Misriwala, and he, in fact, he lost touch with, you know, the rest of the army till the next day. So what Gough did was he ordered an attack on the south and the east. So you've got you know, the rest of the British force basically attacking the camp, and these guys were a lot more successful, and they actually got into the camp, and so there was a serious amount of fighting going on, you know, hand-to-hand fighting, and if you can imagine the camp, you know, just show you. That's a very sort of idealised picture of the Sikh line. I don't think they had that many artillery there, you know. There's about 60 or 70 pieces of artillery at Ferozshah on the Sikh army. But you know, if you can imagine a line, and then you've got a huge number of wagons and you know, carts and, you know, ammunition stuff, and you know, hundreds of bullocks and things, you know, to sort of pull these things around. You know, a huge sort of, plus tents, you know, loads of tents around. Once the British got in, you know, there was a lot of hand-to-hand fighting, you know, in amongst all this thing, and so really confused fighting going on, and that went on till about 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock at night. So really sort of every man for himself, I think. Really, you know, it's impossible to form lines, you know, when there's loads of tents around. But one thing they found was that the British men were actually running out of ammunition, and Gough hadn't brought, you know, any sort of ammunition supplies with him or anything, you know. So, you know, it was a very sort of critical situation here. What do? You know, you haven't got any ammunition, and you're sort of stuck in the middle of a battle. So what he decided to do was actually pull back and form a sort of entrenched camp of his own. So you had this very strange situation where you've got the Sikh camp, you know, which is a sort of a square, and you've got the British camp, which is a square as well, and they're both sort of within a couple of 100 metres of each other. So very, very straight. I've never come across a battle like that really, but that's how they spent the night, within a couple of 100 metres away from each other. This again is a shot from the 1880s. We don't know who took these shots. He was obviously a battlefield fan, sort of going around taking, pictures of these places. But that actually shows, the village of Ferozshah about 35 years after the battle, and you can actually see the British monument there on the left there as well. And that's a slightly blown up shot. That's probably what the village looked like actually. A lot of the village houses were made of mud, with a mud wall around them, and very sort of 1 or 2 story houses. So that's pretty much what I suspect the village looked like then as well. So, and in fact the battlefield as well, because the soldiers had cleared all the jungle away. So night time, it was actually a very very dodgy time, there's no ammunition, so what are we going to do? So Gough decided to sort of take the chance and just stay there basically. It's no fun going back to Mudki, it's it's a matter of prestige as well. He couldn't sort of retreat, after the fighting really. So that would have, made the British force look bad. So he decided to stick it out and just see what happens in the morning. So that's the British camp at night. It's quite a nice picture actually. It shows the Sikh camp on fire, which was actually what was happening. There's loads of sort of ammunition wagons and tents on fire, after all the fighting. So huge sort of fire going on, right next to both of the camps. And it's quite interesting actually reading some of the accounts that people write, of that night. So it's very uncertain time, if you like. Harding, who was the Governor General, actually suggested sort of burning all the state papers and things. It was that sort of that dodgy a time, really. He didn't really want, any sort of sensitive papers being caught by the Sikh army. So really, he actually sent away his sword as well, with his son, Napoleon's sword, because he didn't want that captured as well. So very uncertain time. But what they didn't know was that Lal Singh wasn't 100% happy with what was happening as well. He was the commander at Ferozshah, and he didn't want the Sikh army winning as well. So he made excuses to sort of leave Ferozshah, and so he pulled out all the Sikh army, or most of it, out of Ferozshah. So by the time the British sort of woke up in the morning, the camp was virtually empty, and they sort of almost gave away the victory, really. There was still a few thousand men in the camp, and they refused to go. But they were sort of overpowered quite quickly, and they sort of swept through the camp there. As you can see, all the village there and all the sort of tent and stuff. It's quite a sort of realistic image of the scene, really. And they captured the camp, and that was the end of the battle, really. So it was almost, it was a very close-run thing, really. And that's Harding sort of going over the battlefield, really. This was actually drawn by Charles Harding, I think. It was his son. Quite a nice sort of artist, really. Okay, well, this is whoops, we just missed a shot, but this is actually south of the village, and it's actually getting quite built up now. Now this is a spot where the British Army, made their entrenchment, made their camp, So, this would have been full of, sort of soldiers trying to sort of, catch a few hour or two of sleep or whatever. So you've got some sort of local shops there now, and there's a sort of electricity substation on the left there. It's sort of almost ruining the battlefield now. I wish there was some sort of protection there for battlefields, but the government there isn't too sort of let's say they've got other priorities. So the battlefields are being sort of built on, but it's a shame. It really is a shame. But this gate was actually built by the locals, in memory of the battle. And but there isn't anything else really to see there. And that's a quick shot from Ferozeshah to the west, and that's where the British got repulsed at the start of the battle. So if you can imagine the British line sort of approaching from where the trees are, towards the village, that many years ago, that's and loads of musket balls sort of flying around there, that would have been the scene at that time. And to show you this one, how are we doing for time? Try and sort of speed up a little bit, I think. But this is to the west of the village, so this is where the sort of bulk of the fighting took place. So, that picture you saw of all the tents and things, you would have seen loads of tents here, and sort of people negotiating their way around ropes and things, and sort of getting to each other with bayonets, and sort of a very confused scene. Okay, well that's the British monument at Ferozeshah, and again that's a picture from the sort of early 1880s, and that's still there as well. It's in very good shape actually. It's there's some work being done on it by the Punjab government at the moment. They're putting some sort of touristy sort of stuff around it to explain the battle. So if you ever go there, it's definitely well worth seeing. Okay, well, the only grave that I've actually managed to find at Ferozeshah is at Misriwala, which is the village a couple of miles from the battlefield. And there's a chap called, I think his name's Peter Lambert. He's buried there. And being an officer, I believe, they sort of, his chums sort of did something for him there. But most of the British casualties were actually buried in the trenches that the Sikh soldiers had dug. So all round sort of U-shaped thing, and then buried over. So I'm guessing they're all still there really. Who knows? But it was a very sort of it wasn't a very ordered thing. They were just sort of thrown in, and there's no markers there. Okay, well, the third battle, I'll try and sort of get through this quite quickly, but the third battle was actually quite a small battle, a skirmish, if you like. Harry Smith, I'm sure a lot of people here have heard of Harry Smith, a very sort of accomplished general. He'd actually been sent to Ludhiana, and he was told to sort of pick up troops along the way and only take on a Sikh army that was near Ludhiana once he'd sort of gathered all these forces. But he was quite confident, and he sort of marched right into the Sikh army, and then he found he had to sort of march all the way around it. But he ended up losing his baggage. So a little bit of overconfidence there, rather than sort of veering sort of 5-10 miles down further south or whatever. But he actually made up for it in the next battle, which was the Battle of Aliwal. This is a local museum at Badawal, so if anyone goes there, it's made by a local chap, and contains some sort of paintings of the battle there. Okay, well, Badawal was actually sort of about a week after Badawal. You had the Battle of Aliwal, which is a lot more famous, and that's where Harry Smith got his sort of revenge, if you like, and he managed to beat Ranjit Singh quite sort of decisively, really. He managed to collect all the sort of British forces and garrisons and things, and had a nice strong force, and then sort of proceeded to this battlefield, which is very close to Aliwal. And a couple of shots of the battlefield. There's a village called Paran there, which Harry Smith reached, and what he actually did was he went to the highest house in the village, you know, to get a really good shot of the battlefield, which is the battlefield there, the large plain, and climbed the highest sort of house, and you know, used his sort of binoculars to sort of scan the whole area. So that's what I thought I'd do. So I sort of picked out the highest house there and went out there. So that's pretty much what you know, sort of angle and sort of vision Harry Smith would have seen when he reached the battlefield. So there's a village called Boundary there, right in the distance, which was manned by the Sikh army. So, but the Sikh army was sort of stretched along this massive, great sort of bit of flat land. And this is from the Sikh lines. You can see the you know, the sort of Paran village right in the distance there, sort of little specks of white there. And the British monument there that survives, it's actually placed right on where the Sikh lines went. So I'll just take a closer shot of that a little bit later on. But like I said, it was a very decisive battle for the British, and the Sikh line broke, especially on the left. And it's all quite easy for Harry Smith, really. Ranjit Singh made the mistake of using a lot of irregular troops, you know, and placing them all on his left, and they just broke, and which left just his regular force to sort of tackle the whole of the British force. And that's the Sikh regulars taking on, you know, the British line there, and they basically they were sort of driven back into the river, really. And like I said, it was quite a decisive battle for the British. Huge amount of fighting here. This is actually a dry riverbed, and the Sikh army made part of their stand here. So quite a sort of strong defensive line, really. But at that stage, they'd lost their artillery, and they were sort of mown down by the British artillery, really. So they had to sort of keep retreating. But this was one place where there was a huge amount of fighting. And the battle ended at the river, really. This is the Sutlej River now. It's actually a very sort of poor shadow of what it used to be. It's you know, it's been sort of dammed, and you know, there's a lot of people taking water from it, you know, left, right, and centre. So you know, if you can imagine the river sort of you know, sort of 2-3 times that sort of volume, and maybe a couple of times as wide. You know, that's what the river used to be like. But it's very sort of dried up, and it's almost like a little stream at places. And that's the British monument at Aliwal, and it's very much like the Mudki one, but unfortunately it's actually been damaged quite heavily. Apparently there was some very high winds sort of 20-30 years ago, and the whole top of it sort of just fell off, and so you've just got, you know, the stump left now. In fact, I've got a strong belief that that's not even the original stump. I think the Punjab government have sort of decided to do something there and put something up, and they used some of the original bricks, but you can tell you know, it's not the same sort of 19th century quality that it should be. So, but that's what's there. And the last battle was actually at Sir Brown, and what the Sikh commanders did was they divided the Sikh army into two, and kept half of it across the river with only half of it fighting. You know, I mean, they weren't particularly interested in winning, and I think by that time the soldiers themselves knew, you know, something's up. You know, these guys aren't really leading us or you know, using any sort of initiative and whatever. But it's very difficult to sort of topple them in the middle of the war, really. But the British won this one quite convincingly, and it ended in a bit of a tragedy for the Sikh soldiers. That's an image of the fighting. The Sikh army had sort of made their sort of base around a dry riverbed, which we'll just look at in a minute. And it wasn't much of a defence, really. This is a Satluj at where the Sikh entrenchment was. Basically, it started off where those cows are, and sort of curved round in a sort of a semicircle, if you like. And that's where most of the fighting would have been. You know, this is the middle of the entrenchment, so very sort of sandy, very difficult to sort of run around on, actually. And a lot of the Sikh guns, when they were firing, actually got pushed into the sand. You know, so it's not very very good ground for artillery either. Okay, well, this is where the main fighting took place. This is the Dry Riverbed, which where the two lines faced each other. So the Sikh line was on the left there, on that left bank, with the British approaching on the right, and it was actually dry on the day, you know, so there was no water in the river. So, but some of these banks are quite high, and so there's various sort of stories of British soldiers having to sort of march around some of the banks to get to a slightly easier place to sort of march down, really. This is the left bank. This is where the Sikh line would have been. So, you know, sort of a long line of artillery and infantry. And in fact, according to some research I've done, I have been told that, or I've sort of read that most of the British casualties were actually buried inside the riverbed. Maybe it's just easier to sort of dig a grave there. Who knows? Softer soil or whatever. So that's actually quite a large, sort of wide sort of river, you know, a dry river. So where they are, I don't know, but they lie there anyway. So okay, that's another shot of the river as well. I'll just move on because I think we're sort of running out of time as well, aren't we? So that's where the fighting ended. In fact, the Sikh army was sort of pushed back into the river, and again, the river was a lot bigger than it is now, and very fast flowing apparently at that time as well. So the Sikh army lost about 10,000 men, you know, sort of drowning in the river. So very sort of a tragic end to the whole war, really. And I'll just quickly run through some of these shots. This is the British monument at Sir Brown. Again, a sort of 1880s shot, and what it looks like now. And so it's still there. You know, they don't build them like they used to. You know, I think it will survive for another few hundred years. And this is my favourite shot. You know, I think the British photographer must have told all the villagers to sort of come there, you know, and sort of pose in front of the monument. These villagers are probably from Rodewala, where the British had an outpost. So you know, these guys would have seen a lot of British soldiers sort of hanging around there, and they would have had memories of the battle as well. So okay, well that was the end of the campaign, and the British crossed the river and sort of marched straight to Lahore, really. And And that's where the treaty was made. That's Dalip Singh, who was actually only 9 years old. You know, he was a Maharaja of Punjab. He was actually the youngest son of Ranjit Singh, and all the others had died. You know, in sort of picked off by one person or another, and by default, you know, he was sort of the only son left, and he became the Maharaja. But whether he knew what was happening or not, you know, is another thing. But he was asked to sort of tender his submission there to Harding, the Governor-General, and so that's him arriving there. I think this is by Charles Harding as well, who did quite a few pictures of these scenes. And that's the British sort of marching to Lahore. That's another one by Harding, and that's it. The treaty was signed there, really, and that sort of gave the British basically not quite a grip on the Punjab, but I don't know if they wanted to sort of have a grip as such. You know, the weakness of the Lahore government sort of almost sort of led them to sort of think about sort of taking over. I think, you know, the people in power in Lahore were not particularly sort of able people. You know, it wasn't really a meritocracy, and that was the beginning of the end. Really, you had the Treaty of Lahore, which was quite punitive, actually, which left Punjab about sort of half the size it was, and limited the Sikh army as well. And you had a number of other treaties as well. Treaty of Amritsar, which separated the Kashmir from Punjab. And then what really did it was the Treaty of Byrawal, about 9 months later after the war, when the British resident, who was Henry Lawrence, he actually became almost the successor to Ranjit Singh. You know, he took over basically the reins of government, and that was it really. And it's my impression that because the takeover was so quick, that sort of almost triggered off the next war. I think, you know, people thought, oh, hang on, they're taking over you know, the whole country now. You know, we gave them some money and they've got the land. Now they're sort of taking over the government as well. So that sort of triggered off the next war, which came about 2 years later. The last thing I just wanted to show everyone was Firozpur Cemetery. So, you know, if anyone ever visits these places, that's one of the great places to go. So you've got some of the notable people sort of buried there. And that's Broadfoot, Broadfoot's grave, who was the British political agent, you know, in Punjab before the war. And that's the gravestone there. And that's Robert Sale's burial sort of place. And a lot of these graves are actually in bad shape at the moment. I don't know if anyone's going to do anything about it, but that's a shot from, you know, the 19th century. That's what these places look like, and that's another grave. A lot of them, like I said, they're in very bad shape, and it's difficult to make out some of those, you know, who's buried there. A lot of the marble sort of grave plaques have been sort of nicked, basically. I think they're worth something, you know, they're marble, so, you know, some local kids probably sort of, you know, extract them and sell them for a few quid, I think. So anyway, a marble gravestone's at risk, you know, but if it's just etched on the stone, then you're probably a little bit safer. So like this chap, you know, there's no marble there. Okay, and that's another shot. And that's another shot of some of the graves there. And I think somebody's done some sort of grave robbing there, or tried to. That's sort of burying in and seeing if there's something there, but I'm sure there wasn't much to sort of nick or anything. But again, they're in very bad shape. And that's a then and now shot again. And if anyone wants to read anything more about this, you know, the battlefields themselves or the campaign, you know, give my book a try. So that's the book. I'm actually working on a second Anglo Sikh war at the moment. I'll be going to Pakistan and hopefully sort of photograph the battlefields there, and which I don't think are really sort of documented in you know, in as much detail as they should be, really. So hopefully that will be of interest to people, and that's going to be out sort of mid next year. So you know, if anyone's interested in second Anglo Sikh war battlefields, then you know, that's the book. Okay, that's it. Yeah.
Amarpal, thank you very much indeed for that.